Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited to have Ruan here from ShareAction. So today we're having a conversation about the thousands of retail workers who earn less than they need to live a decent life and the actions that ShareAction are taking to push not just investors but also big retailers towards disclosing more about the pay of their workers, but also pushing them to commit to a real living wage. So thank you so much for joining us, Ruan. So do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself and what Share Action does?
Yeah, thanks, Kira, and it's great to be here. So I'm Ruan Opie-Meres, so I'm a senior campaign officer in the Good Work team at ShareAction. And ShareAction is an NGO, and it works to essentially harness the power of investment. And that may seem sort of distant, but at the end of the day, what that means is everyone's money. So, if people pay into a pension, it means where that pension is being spent, but also just everyday savings as well. So we work to build a world where the financial system, that investment system, all the money in the world, really serves our planet and also its people as well. So not just profit.
Mhm.
And we do this via sort of various different ways. The first one is that we try to just reform that system. We try and change the rules. So we work with policymakers around the world, particularly in the UK and in Europe. So that's, MPs, EU Parliament, to change those rules to make sure that sustainability and responsibility is at the heart of every decision on how that money is spent. We also work to raise the standards of that industry, of the financial system. So we do that by, researching how the organizations that manage this money is managing it. So are they thinking with that responsibility at the heart of their decision or not?
Mhm.
And we also work with investors, and this is something that I do mostly. So I work with investors who really, believe in similar things that we believe in, and we can get into that a little bit later on. But we work with them to talk to really big corporations. Um, so we work on various different themes. As I said, I work in the Good Work team, but we also work on climate change. So we make sure that we know that the businesses we're talking to are committed to net zero, and so on. And we also have a health team that works with investors to talk to big corporations to make sure that the food that they're developing, for instance, is healthy. And sort of the connecting thread between all that is that we want to involve everyday people in our work. As I said, the financial system and the investment system at the end of the day is everyone's money. And that's why it's so important that people are involved in how that money is being managed and where it's being put, because we believe people do want the planet and its people to be at the heart of that. And so we work with them to bring them into the system to democratize it in a sense. And the most obvious way that we do that is through something that we call AGM activism, and we can talk about what AGMs are, but we want people to be in the room asking these corporations, asking these investors the really key questions about are they being responsible with the money that they have.
Yeah, I think that's so important, and that's why I was so looking forward to the conversation today. I think because I think often these mega corporations and financial institutions can feel really out of reach for people and as though they just are something that happens separately to us. So I'm really interested in your work to bring people in and to make them feel like they can do something meaningful and can get involved. Do you want to tell us a bit about the campaign you've been running?
Yeah, sure. So I work, as I said, in the Good Work team. So we have various different sort of strands. One half that my colleague Conor runs is on ethnicity pay gap reporting. So this has been sort of one of the pioneers in that space to ensure that corporations report the ethnicity pay gap that they may have. The other side of our work is living wage and insecure work, and that's the sort of half that I manage. So our living wage campaign at ShareAction is one of the longest running campaigns that we have. And over that time, it's been going on for more than a decade. Over that time, we have seen huge successes of the broader campaign as well. So we now have something around 16,000 accredited living wage employers in the UK. And that means, that they're accredited with the Living Wage Foundation, which is an independent organization that sets a wage that really factors in the cost of living, unlike what the government sets, which we believe does not. It's not enough for people to live on. So we've seen all these accredited businesses. So we have, for example, IKEA, Burberry, Lush on the high street, paying all their staff the real living wage, paying all their directly employed staff and their third-party contractors the real living wage year in, year out.
Mm.
Um, I suppose the campaign, though, took on a slightly, not that it's ever not been important, but took on a different sort of context in the previous few years. And that is, I suppose, because of the cost of living crisis.
Absolutely.
Um, everyone, of course, is aware of it and the impacts it's had, but 8 million working age adults are in poverty at the moment. 4 million households are don't have enough money for food. Um, and that sort of gave us a sort of new, renewed importance to this campaign.
Mm.
And it required us to think differently. So we started thinking about, low pay isn't just bad in that it doesn't provide food on the table, or that it's poor for businesses as well. But it's a risk on a systemic level, to our society and also to our economy. So that can manifest in various different ways, but it reduces the productivity of a society, which has knock-on effects in terms of wealth generation.
Mm.
It's bad for people's health, which can then, of course, put sort of strain on state resources such as the NHS, in the context of the UK, but also just on a sort of micro level. Low pay is just bad for people's health, and also the impact of inequality. Low pay is a massive contributing factor for inequality, and inequality is something that we see around the world, and it obviously has negative sort of impacts manifesting in various different ways. But one of those is sort of um, the social and political impacts of inequality. People are sort of frustrated with how things have been going recently,
Mm.
and we really see solving the issue of low pay as a really important way to sort of mitigate some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think bring societies and communities together. I think we get more polarized, of course, if there's more inequality and people, I think, also can only focus on exactly what's in front of them. If you're struggling to make ends meet, you're struggling to provide to your most basic needs, how can you think or act or mobilize beyond that? It just becomes so, I imagine it just becomes so all consuming. Yeah, and even all the knock-on effects you were talking about with yeah, health, like even how would you sleep at night if you're really worried about getting to the end of the week, end of the month? I think it just, yeah, it's such an all-consuming worry. So I think it's so important. And like you said, top of mind for so many people, so many individuals, so many families and households at the moment. Cost of living is their number one priority. So yeah, I think that's super important work you're doing. So what is it about retail? Why are you focusing on retail?
Yeah, so when we sort of took on this new thinking, as I said, that sort of systemic risk of inherent low pay, we wanted to look beyond the sort of industries that has seen success. There are certain industries that are very open to the idea of living wages, and that's been really great. As I said, 16,000 employers now accredited in the UK. So we wanted to look at a sector and an industry that has been historically resistant to these ideas. And that's sort of why we started thinking about retail. So this is a mostly non-unionized sector. So workers don't have much of a say in how their pay is set. They are often paid the sort of legal minimum, and therefore there are lots of difficulties with that. When the government publishes its sort of yearly report on how many businesses have been found to be underpaying their staff legally, the legal right. There are lots of retail companies on that list. It's also up there with the sort of largest low paid sectors in the UK. So, for example, the two largest employers on low pay is the hospitality and the retail industry. So retail comes in at number two. It has around 800,000 workers paid below the real living wage.
Mm.
Um, and we also, given our sort of theory of change and how we work with investors to talk to these businesses and engage them, it's really key that these businesses are public. So what that means is that they're sort of traded on the stock market. And that allows shareholders to have, a bit more of an influencing say, and allows that democratization of people coming in and talking to these businesses.
Mm.
And because they're public businesses, often with retail, unlike hospitality, we have a history of engagement. So we've been talking to these businesses for many years, talking to them and understanding their concerns about living wages, and have felt like we've sort of developed that relationship. And also because we I think retail holds like a sort of special place in our heart, particularly in the UK. You walk down the street and you see shuttered shops,
Mm.
and the British High Street is such like an important part of our society. And we think that this addiction to low wages and low pay is part of that problem. We see benefits to the living wage. And it's really about trying to improve the sector, trying to make sure it's more responsible to society and the economy, but also for these businesses as well. So accredited living wage employers say that they see their reputation increase. People will want to shop there more because they're seen to be responsible. Their retention is bettered, and retention is just ensuring that staff actually stick around rather than just leaving and bringing in new staff.
Mhm.
And also their productivity as well. These are workers who will want to come to work and actually, like their job, and they want to commit to this business because they feel like they've been being treated fairly. They want to, they feel healthier. They have time to be able to, have leisure outside of work, and that all creates a system where businesses will see benefits. So really, it's not just the sort of negative damages that this is having on our society and our economy and our politics, but it's really in making sure that these businesses have some sort of advantage in a really competitive space.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's so familiar to all of us as for our Fashion Revolution, we talk about people as citizens to try and mobilize them. But of course, consumers as well, for customers, like we're very familiar with going into shops and that experience. So I think this is a touch point for all of us, and actually it's relevant for everybody. So many questions from what you just said there. So firstly, I'm really interested, what sectors are doing better? So retail's been a bit stubborn at tackling low pay. Where has living wage work gone a bit better? That'll be my first one.
Yeah, so as I said, there are some manufacturers that are doing really well.
Great.
I mentioned Burberry has been a pioneer in the fashion space in paying living wages. We also see, I think it's really key. Sometimes when we talk to retailers, they say that their workforce is really complex,
Mm.
and that they hire seasonal workers, etc. And that means paying real living wage is quite difficult and also being an accredited living wage employer is difficult because they need to make that commitment. But actually, quite frankly, there are lots of construction companies, for example, that commit to paying the real living wage year in, year out. And that is quite seasonal. It can be quite, you bring in workers for a particular month and then they move on to another job. So we do see this being, possible in the case for retail. But yeah, I mean, accredited employers all over the country. They're from small businesses to big businesses, and all of them. I think the actual figure is 87% report improvements to their reputation. So it's a universal positive experience.
Yeah, evidenced, well worth doing and impactful. So tell me a bit more about shareholder resolutions. If I didn't know anything about shareholder resolution, how might you explain that to me?
Yeah, so a shareholder resolution, which is just for a bit of context, is where this campaign has been building towards. So we've been talking to retailers throughout last year, and then this year we made the decision that we wanted to file what we call a shareholder resolution. And these are, and we decided to do select three companies, and these companies are representative of the sector, coming from all different parts of the sector. They all sort of, they varying degrees of practice in terms of like how they pay their staff.
Mhm.
But that was really key. So we decided to file these resolutions at these three companies. They are M&S, JD Sports, and Next. Um, and what it is it's a tool essentially, and it's often seen as a sort of escalation in our engagement with a company. So we'll be talking to a company for a while. We'll be sending them letters with investors signing it, with everyday people signing it.
Mhm.
We'll be going to their AGMs, their annual general meetings, and asking questions to the board. We'll be meeting with them and getting around the table and asking them in a bit more detail about, what are they doing to tackle low pay in their workforce. But often, as I said, retail has been resistant to this idea, and so we decided to go down this route of filing resolutions. It's a tool to escalate that engagement,
Yeah.
and what it is it's a proposal by everyday people and investors asking a company to do something. And it's quite a complex thing. You have to get a lot of people to buy a share in a company, sort of like on a stock market. And then also the investors have to be shareholders in the company. So they file this proposal, and then it's voted on by shareholders at an AGM. Um, and then essentially what it allows is people to influence, really actual have like real influence on these huge companies. And as you said, they're really distant and far away, but this allows people
Yeah.
to get in the room, put a really important issue, in front of them, get people talking about it. And in this case, we wanted to ask these companies to produce a report. And this report is essentially to make transparent various different sort of details of their workforce. And we hope that by producing this report, it encourages them to tackle low pay in their workforce. But it also has other sort of benefits beyond that as well.
Yeah, a phrase comes up. We do a lot of transparency campaigning as well and pushing brands to be more transparent on lots of different issues, mainly in their supply chain we work in. But like you've just said, when we look at big fashion retailers, we often find systemically across the board these issues. So say low pay for poverty pay for supply chain workers is also systemic with lots of different major fashion retailers. Um, having stubborn issues with this in their supply chain. We're really pushing them to do more. But it's not my quote, I can't remember who said it, but is sunlight is the best disinfectant, which is if we just expose these gaps, if we just ask people to be transparent, then we're going to start looking at them, and hopefully these gaps will get a bit more scrutiny and a bit more work. If we're going to have to look at what are our workers paid, and put that in the public domain, hopefully that can push the conversation forward a little bit. Something I'm really interested in is third party contractors and kind of service providers in shops. So maybe people you go in that are security or they clean the shop, but they're not directly employed by the retailer. Can you tell me a bit about that and how it intersects with your campaign?
Yeah, sure. I really like that phrase as well. I wish I'd heard it beforehand so we could have
It's
started
not
saying
mine. I'll find out who said it. Yeah.
it. Yeah, no. So as I said in this report, there's like various different things that we're asking about, and one of those is how many third-party contractors, agency staff, are paid below the real living wage in a given business, and we think that's really important. You know, some of the businesses that we talk to and have engaged, including one of the ones that we filed a resolution at, does pay the real living wage to their directly employed staff, which obviously is brilliant. We commend that sort of positive movement within the retail industry on that. But as I said before, we work a lot with the Living Wage Foundation that really sets the sort of standards and best practice in this. And that is, as I said, an accredited living wage employer. And to be an accredited living wage employer, you need to pay your directly employed staff the real living wage, but you also need to pay your third-party contractors the real living wage as well. And you need to make that commitment so it's fair among the entire workforce. There is a bit of sort of definition around that. It's not just any sort of agency staff. They need to be, regular. They need to work for the business often, and they also need to be on site. They need to, be working there and sharing the same workplace, and that hopefully sort of balances out the difficulties that a company may have in making that commitment. Um, and I think it's a really important aspect of this because, these third-party contractors, these agency staff are often the most vulnerable to cost of living pressures. Um, they're often in insecure work.
Mm,
And also at the same time, it's really important just to recognize the importance of these staff. The work that they're providing is just as important as the directly employed staff in a shop, on
mm,
the floor, working in logistics in the warehouse. For example, these are security guards, they are cleaners. Um, and yeah, it's so we think it's really important, and it's a key aspect to the report that we're asking these businesses to develop. We really want to know how many of these third party contractors are paid below the real living wage,
yeah.
and how they can uplift that number.
Yeah, no, for sure. Shops wouldn't function without them, right? We couldn't have shops if they weren't kept clean. We wouldn't be safe in shops if there wasn't security. So I think it's really important. And also just to not create division in those workplaces as well. I know that there's a different setup. They're not directly employed, but you don't want a two-tiered system where, yeah, some people can afford to live, a basic but decent life and others can't. I think that's important for cohesion. So I'm really obsessed with good examples and impact and really championing like examples of where stuff has made a difference. I think we all need to hold on to hope a bit. So can you tell me about any times you've influenced company practices in the past? Yeah, give us a bit of hope.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's useful, and sometimes we do need a good example. When I've been talking and having these conversations with the retail industry, sometimes it's tough to keep going. But we have seen progress, we have seen success, not just in retail, but more broadly as well. So we often will engage a business on various issues, whether that be living wage or also insecure work and providing good, strong, secure contracts. And we've seen through our engagement, through talking to these businesses, they have gone on
Mm,
to the Living Wage Foundation and accredited, and we've seen, protections put in place because of that engagement, and that is really what, at the end of the day, these are people who are going to have their employment improved as a result of all of our campaigning, which is really great to see. The most relevant to this is in 2022, ShareAction, along with the investors we work with, and also the everyday people who have invested as well. We all got together and we filed a shareholder resolution at Sainsbury's, and this was supported by, at the time, 17% of shareholders voted in favour of our proposal at Sainsbury's, and as a result, 19,000 workers in London got an uplift
amazing.
to the real living wage,
Mm,
which is, that is really significant, and I think the best example of the sort of impact that this style of campaigning can have. Also, more recently, as I said, we filed these three shareholder resolutions.
mm,
Um, we have two AGMs coming up where these are going to be voted on. One has already passed, and that went a few weeks ago, and that was at Next. A whopping 27% of shareholders voted in favour of that result. And Next have now said that they're going to commit to making some disclosures, and that we should see something in November. And I mean, 27% and 17% in the case of Sainsbury's may seem not that much, but in the context of this, where thousands of AGMs are occurring throughout the season, and investors have limited time and capacity to decide on how to vote. It's a really important and big deal, and
mm.
also factoring in, like the businesses themselves will be talking to these investors saying, don't do this, they don't want to do this,
Yeah, no.
and that's sort of what we're up against. But we've seen really great success recently, and also within a few years.
Absolutely. And I think all of us in campaigning, we're always trying to just get to that critical mass, right? Like how many people do we need to move that it makes a difference? And so like I say, yeah, 20, what did you say, 27% that
27.
huge achievement and huge kudos, because I think just getting that many people engaged, like you said, when you're up against people discouraging them, the companies discouraging them, shows there is huge appetite there, actually, even among shareholders. And I think, yeah, like you said, the cost of living crisis, everyone has felt it more acutely. Everyone has felt it more acutely over the last few years. Of course, some on the sharper end of that than others, but I think it has raised in all our consciousness. And 19,000 workers getting an uplift at Sainsbury's. I think let's really bring that back to the human impact of that as well. Of like, these aren't just figures, these are people's lives. These are people that are going to sleep better at night, that might be able to put a small amount of savings away so that if they hit if a boiler breaks or a car breaks down, it's not everything grinding to a halt. The ripple effects of that, I think, are just so significant. And yeah, as I was saying earlier, I think, I think a lot of workers in low paid work are they're money poor, but they're also time poor. Maybe, I mean, there's a whole other conversation about precarious hours and 0 hours contracts, but can't always plan their time well ahead. So yeah, might be time poor as well. But so just these impacts of a pay rise, I think are just felt so acutely. But also, every time we speak to unions, this is more supply chain side, but I don't doubt for a second it's the same at the work you're doing. Um, Garment workers' number one demand, bar none, every single time we ask them, is fair pay. Like it just comes through so clearly. And I think that as campaigners, we really need to be standing with those workers and pushing behind their top demand. So I think that's why, work on fair pay is so impactful, because it gets to the heart of the number one issue for them, and and the ripple effects of that are just really exciting, I think.
Yeah, exactly. The easiest way that we can solve inequality and poverty is just improving pay. And when companies sort of say, "Oh, but we have, benefits, etc." No, like this is, as you said, this is the number one issue. This is the easiest. This is the simplest tool that we have
Mm.
to solving these really big issues that are so prevalent today.
And also just about trusting your workforce. Like it's almost gets to like benefits are great if they're an add-on, but if you can't meet your basic needs, if you can't afford to live a comfortable, basic, decent life, then, yes, you can have services that might be important, add-ons, but it's about trusting people to spend their money on what they need to as well. And I think I feel quite passionately that that worker is the best place to decide what they need to spend their money on in their life rather than the employer. But that's a whole other conversation. So tell me, if will the resolution pass? If not, is there a plan? Yeah, talk to
Yeah.
me about the resolution.
So we have two coming up this week on Tuesday and Wednesday. As I said, we already had one pass. One resolution happen a few weeks ago, and as I said, that received 27%. So under UK law, you need quite a high amount of shareholders to support the proposal for the company to legally have to do the proposal. However, you only need 20% for the company to formally respond. And that's what we've seen now with Next, that they are now legally needed to respond to the resolution. It's also like, just because it may not force legally a company to do something, it's really about sort of getting the issue in front of the board, getting them in front of other investors, having conversations like this and getting it in front of other audiences is really key. So it allows us to talk about this. So as I said, we've got two AGMs and the resolution's going to vote at the AGMs this week. And we're hoping for another successful day. Yeah.
Yeah, so exciting. And I think you're right, it's about building that pressure and showing not only do their shareholders care about this and want it and move up the agenda, but actually citizens, all of us listening and mobilizing here, we all care about this as well as their customers. And yeah, just moving up the agenda, I think, is so important at focusing boards on decisions like this. So talking to that, how can everybody listening, how can we get involved with your campaign? How can we support? What's the best way to stand with these workers?
Yeah, so I would recommend this week to, if you're interested, follow along the progress and see how we get on. As I said at the M&S AGM and JD Sports AGM, so you can follow ShareAction on social media. It's ShareAction underscore NGO on Instagram. We also have LinkedIn at ShareAction. We also recommend you check out our website. As I said, a really important aspect of what we do is getting everyday people involved in how their money, their savings, is being spent. And we work on a range of issues. So, if you want to work on and get involved on this, then you can, but you can also get involved in climate, biodiversity, health, all sorts. And you can sign up and you can volunteer and you can go to an AGM and you can stand in that room and talk to the CEO, talk to the chair of a business that you think might be doing something wrong. So if you want to get involved in that, go to our website, shareaction.org. Um, we have a newsletter. I think you'll be able to see the
Yeah.
buttons, sign up.
We can signpost. I just think that's such a awesome opportunity though, because I feel like a lot of us in this space really care about all these issues, but it can feel kind of overwhelming to get involved. So yeah, I just love to hear that you train people up to speak at AGMs. I think that's such a cool, empowering way to kind of hold power to account and to feel like you're really engaging in a mechanism that's really driving action. So that's fantastic. So we'll follow along, Ruin. We'll wish you all the best of luck next week, and we can't wait to see the outcomes. And yeah, we'd just love to continue to amplify with our audience and continue to get people behind you. So thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you. It's been
Okay.
great to chat to you.
Thank you.